The single telegraph wire sliced across the blue vastness of the Arizona sky like a scar on a perfect face. It hummed in the wind, a low, metallic vibration that sounded less like communication and more like a warning to the men in the dusty saddles riding beneath it. The wire was a tether to civilization, a promise that Washington and the rest of the world were only a series of clicks and dashes away. But to the land itself, and to the man watching from the high ridge of red sandstone, that wire looked like a noose. It was waiting to tighten. Below the ridge, the Dry Creek Basin sprawled out in a chaotic tumble of mesquite, sagebrush, and rocks that held the heat of the day long after the sun went down. Cutting through the thirst of the valley was the river. It did not have a grand name on the maps drawn in the east, but here, it was simply the vein of life. The water was shockingly clear, running over a bed of smooth stones, cold and indifferent to the politics of the territory. Nantan lay flat against the heated rock, his body pressing into the earth so completely that from a distance he would have been indistinguishable from the stone. He was a warrior of the Apache, though he wore no war paint today. His hair was thick and dark, held back by a simple strip of cloth. His eyes, dark as obsidian, watched the movement in the valley floor with the patience of a hawk waiting for a field mouse to make a mistake. He did not trust the quiet. The year was 1879, and silence in the territory usually meant someone was reloading. He watched the dust cloud moving along the stage road. It was the afternoon coach heading for Red Hearth, the mining town that had erupted like a boil on the skin of the valley 3 years ago. Nantan shifted slightly, his gaze drifting from the coach to the river. The water was lower than it had been last month. He had tasted it 2 mornings ago, and it had tasted faintly of metal and dead things. The mine was hungry. The fort was hungry, and they were feeding on the river. "They draw lines on paper," Nantan whispered to the wind, his voice rough. "But water does not know how to read," inside the swaying, bone-shaking confinement of the stagecoach. Eliza Hart pressed a handkerchief to her nose and tried to breathe without inhaling half of the territory. The dust was pervasive. It coated the leather seats, settled in the folds of her gray traveling dress, and gritted between her teeth. "Nearly there, miss," the driver shouted down from the box, his voice cracking over the roar of the wheels and the thundering hooves. Eliza did not answer. She gripped the handle of the large, battered leather case on the floorboard with one hand and her smaller medical bag with the other. The large case held her livelihood and her burden, a heavy wooden camera, glass plates, and the volatile chemicals required to capture a shadow on a sheet of tin or glass. The medical bag held her skills bandages, tinctures, clean steel instruments, and the experience of 5 years working in a charity ward in Philadelphia, where she had seen more blood than most soldiers. She was 28 years old, a spinster by the standards of the world she had left behind, and a curiosity in the world she was entering. She touched the pocket of her skirt, feeling the crinkle of the letter hidden there. The envelope was worn from how many times she had read it. It was a job offer to work as a nurse and midwife for the growing families of Red Hearth, with a side note that her skills as a photographic artist would be welcomed by the mine owners who wanted to document their progress for investors back east. The pay offered was substantial $50 a month, plus room and board. It was enough to buy independence. Enough to ensure she never had to rely on the charity of a distant cousin or the heavy-handed patronage of a senior doctor who thought a woman's hands were only good for wiping brows, not stitching wounds. But it was the seal on the letter that bothered her, a blob of red wax, pressed with a thumbprint. Not a crest. It felt urgent. It felt personal. "Red Hearth," the driver bellowed. The coach crested a rise, and the town revealed itself. It was an ugly thing, built of raw lumber and canvas, clinging to the side of the valley like a fungus. The dominant structure was the stamp mill for the Crow Silver Mine, its chimney belching black smoke that stained the pristine sky. Below it, the town sprawled in a grid of mud and ambition. As the horses slowed, Eliza looked out the window. She saw men, hundreds of them, miners covered in red dust, soldiers in blue wool uniforms that looked agonizing in the heat, and drifters with low-slung holsters. She saw very few women, and the ones she did see wore the weary, hardened expressions of those who had learned that in the West. Softness was a liability. The coach lurched to a halt in front of the Wells Fargo office. The door was yanked open, and the heat hit Eliza like a physical blow. It smelled of horse manure, sulfur, unwashed bodies, and stale beer. "End of the line, ma'am," the driver said, offering a gloved hand. Eliza took it and stepped down, her boots sinking into the dry earth. She felt the eyes immediately. It was a sensation she hated, the feeling of being assessed, weighed, and priced. In Philadelphia, she had been ignored. Here, she was a spectacle. She signaled for the driver to help with her heavy case. "Careful with that, please. It is fragile." "Glass?" the driver asked, grunting as he lowered the box. "Chemistry," Eliza corrected. A man stepped off the boardwalk and approached her. He was dressed in a suit that cost more than Eliza had earned in the last 2 years combined, though the hem of his trousers was stained with red dust. He had a face that might have been handsome if not for the cold calculation in his pale eyes. "Miss Hart?" he asked. His voice was smooth, polished like a river stone. "I am," Eliza said, straightening her spine. She dusted off her skirt, refusing to look intimidated. "And you are—" "Silas Crow," he said, tipping his hat slightly. "I own the mine, and effectively, I own the town. I trust your journey was not too arduous." Crow, the name from the contract, but he had not signed the letter with a thumbprint. The signature on the contract had been a scrawl she could barely read. "It was long—" "Mr. Crow," Eliza said. "I am eager to see my quarters and the clinic." "Of course," Crow said. He gestured, and a younger man hurried forward to take her bags. "But first, I thought you might want to see why you are here." The heart of the operation. He pointed toward the river. From this angle, Eliza could see a wooden structure being built out into the water, a diversion dam of sorts. Soldiers in blue uniforms were standing guard around the workers. "Captain Rourke and I have an understanding," Crow said, noticing her gaze. "The cavalry protects the interests of commerce, and commerce supports the cavalry. We are taming this land, Miss Hart, turning chaos into order." Eliza looked at the river. It flowed fast and free, fighting against the wooden pilings. "It looks like the river prefers its own course." Crow laughed, a dry sound. "The river does what it is told, eventually. Everything out here does. It just takes the right leverage." He looked at her then, a look that made Eliza's skin crawl. It was the look of a man who collected things. "I heard you were a spirited woman. That is why I agreed to the hiring. We need spirit here, but not too much. Order, Miss Hart. That is what separates us from the savages." Up on the ridge, Nantan lowered his head. He had seen the woman step off the coach. He had seen the way the sun caught the stray curls of hair that had escaped her bonnet, turning them to spun gold. He had seen Crow step forward to claim her. "Another bird for the cage," Nantan murmured. He turned his attention to the soldiers near the river. Captain Rourke was there, sitting high on a bay gelding. Rourke was a man of strict lines and sharp angles. He believed in maps and fences. He hated the Apache not with passion, but with the cold efficiency of a man clearing weeds from a garden. Nantan moved silently back from the edge of the cliff. He made his way down a hidden defile. Moving with the fluidity of water, he needed to report to the elders, but his mind kept snagging on the image of the woman with the heavy boxes. She did not move like the other women who came to the town. She did not shrink. She stood straight. But standing straight in a storm just made you an easier target for the lightning. By late afternoon, Eliza had been shown to a small room at the back of the boarding house. It was clean enough, though the walls were thin. She could hear the arguments from the saloon next door and the rumble of the stamp mill, a constant mechanical heartbeat that shook the floorboards. She unpacked her medical bag first. The tools of her trade gave her comfort: the stethoscope, the forceps, the clean rolls of linen. She laid them out on the small washstand. Then she turned to the heavy camera case. She opened it and checked the lens. It was unbroken. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed and pulled the letter from her pocket again. She broke the wax seal, crumbling the red flakes between her fingers. Miss Hart. The town needs a healer, but the valley needs a witness. Come to Red Hearth. Do not trust the men who speak of progress. Trust the water. A friend. There was no name. Just that cryptic message and the contract from Crow enclosed. She had taken the job because she needed the money. But the message had hooked her curiosity. Who was this friend? And why did they warn her against the very man who paid her wages? She walked to the window. The sun was setting, turning the sky into a bruise of purple and violent orange. She looked out toward the river. From here, she could see the dark line of the willows and cottonwoods that marked the water's edge. She felt a strange pull, a desire to go down there, to wash the dust of the journey from her skin and see this water that she was supposed to trust. But it was too late, and the town was too rough for a woman to walk alone at dusk. Tomorrow, she whispered. I will see the truth of it tomorrow. Down in the street, shadows lengthened. The gas lamps of the saloon flickered to life. Eliza watched as a group of miners stumbled out into the street, laughing loudly. One of them shoved another, and a fist fight broke out. It was brutal and short. The loser was left groaning in the mud while the others cheered. No one helped him. Eliza turned away from the window. This was a difficult place, a place where weakness was punished. She thought of Philadelphia, of the senior doctor who had told her she was too emotional to handle surgery, even as she had clamped the artery he had missed. She thought of the man she'd almost married, who had told her that her photography was a charming hobby that she would naturally give up once the children came. She had run from that suffocating softness into this abrasive hardness. She wondered, briefly, if she had made a terrible mistake. 3 miles downstream, the darkness had already claimed the valley floor. Nantan sat by a small fire that gave off no smoke, hidden in a cleft of rocks. He was sharpening his knife, the rhythmic shh sound the only noise in the night. Old Thomas, the Mexican station keeper who ran the swing station for the stage line, sat across from him. Thomas was one of the few outsiders Nantan tolerated. The old man knew when to speak and when to be silent. The soldiers are moving more supplies to the outpost, Thomas said quietly. Dynamite, crates of it. They say it is for the mine, but they are storing it near the river bend. Nantan stopped sharpening. Dynamite is for rock. Why store it by the water? Crow wants to divert the main flow, Thomas said, spitting into the fire. He needs more water to wash the ore. He plans to blast the natural levee. If he does that, the water will rush into his flumes, the creek that feeds your winter camp. It will go dry. Nantan's grip on the knife handle tightened until his knuckles were the color of old bone. The treaty says the water is shared. Crow does not sign treaties, Thomas said. He signs checks, and Captain Rourke cashes them. Nantan looked up at the stars. The Great Spirit had placed the stars to guide men, but men like Crow only looked down at the dirt, looking for silver. They will not take the water, Nantan said. It was not a boast. It was a statement of fact, like saying the sun would rise. Be careful, Nantan, Thomas warned. They are looking for a reason. 1 arrow in a soldier, 1 raid on a wagon, and Rourke will have the excuse he needs to clear the valley. He calls it pacification. I call it murder. I will not give them an excuse, Nantan said. But I will not give them the river. He stood up, extinguishing the small fire with a handful of dirt. There is a new woman in town. She carries boxes of glass. Thomas nodded. The nurse, Hart. I saw her manifest. She is here to patch up the miners when the charges go off too soon. She has eyes that see, Nantan said, surprising himself. She looked at the ridge today. She did not look with fear. She looked with hunger. Stay away from her, Thomas said. White women are dangerous. If you touch one, the whole army comes. If you look at one too long, they hang you. I have no interest in her. Nantan lied. But she is part of the puzzle. Crow met her personally. Nantan slipped into the darkness. He moved toward the river, needing to hear its song, to reassure himself that it was still there. The water was his oldest ancestor. It had been there before the Apache, before the Spanish, before the Americans. He reached the bank and stripped off his shirt. The night air was cool, but his blood ran hot with anger. He waded into the shallows. The water swirled around his waist, cool and forgiving. He washed his face, letting the droplets run down his chest. He was the storm that protected this valley. He had always been the storm. But as he looked toward the glow of the town lights in the distance, he felt a strange shifting in the wind. A different kind of storm was coming, one he could not fight with a knife or a bow. Back in her room, Eliza could not sleep. The heat was stifling. She got up and poured water from the pitcher into the basin. She splashed her face, gasping at the shock of it. She looked at her reflection in the small, distorted mirror. Her eyes were wide, dark circles bruising the skin beneath them. "You are Eliza Hart," she said in her reflection. "You are not a victim. You are not a possession. You are here to work, to survive." She touched the camera case again. Tomorrow, she will set it up. She would take a picture of the town, of the mine, of the soldiers. She would document this place. Photographs did not lie. People lied. Men like Silas Crow lied. But light and chemicals and glass told the truth. She did not know yet that the truth was dangerous. She did not know that the camera would capture things she was not meant to see. She did not know that a single slip on a muddy bank would change the trajectory of her life more than the 3,000 miles she had traveled by train and coach. All she knew was that the air in Dry Creek Basin felt heavy, charged with static, like the moment before thunder cracks the sky. She went to the window one last time. The telegraph wire was invisible in the dark now, but she knew it was there. Hummed its silent messages. Order, silver, control, below it, in the dark. The river whispered back. Life, chaos, freedom. Eliza blew out the lamp. The darkness took the room, but the smell of the dust remained, settling into her clothes, into her hair, claiming her. She was part of the West now, and the West, as the old saying went, did not forgive mistakes. Far away, a coyote howled, a lonely, jagged sound that shivered up her spine. It sounded like a question that had no answer. Or perhaps it was a greeting to the trouble that had just stepped off the stagecoach in a gray dress, 3 days after her arrival in Red Hearth. The illusion of civilization shattered like a glass bottle against a rock. Eliza Hart had hired a small buckboard wagon to ride out to the junction, 5 miles south of town. The monthly medical supply shipment from Tucson was overdue, and the clinic was dangerously low on laudanum and clean ether. The driver, a nervous boy of 19 named Thomas, had chattered incessantly about the heat until they crested the ridge overlooking the pass. Then, he had gone silent. Below them, the supply wagon was not moving. It lay on its side, a broken beetle in the dust. Smoke curled lazily from the canvas cover, black and oily against the blue sky. "Stay here," Eliza ordered, her voice tighter than she intended. She grabbed her medical kit, instinct overriding caution. "Miss Hart, we should turn back," Thomas stammered, his knuckles white on the reins. "That looks like a raid." "There might be survivors," she said, climbing down. The gravel crunched loudly under her boots. She approached the wreckage with her heart hammering against her ribs. The air smelled of burnt wood and copper. 2 horses lay dead in the traces. The driver was sprawled in the dirt, an arrow protruding from his chest. Another man, the guard, lay near the wheel. Eliza knelt beside the guard. He was gone, but as she reached to check his pulse, she noticed the arrow fletching. It was crude. The feathers dyed a garish red that looked more like chicken blood than ceremonial paint. And the boots the dead man wore were gone, stripped from his feet. She stood up, scanning the scene. The crates of medicine were smashed, the glass vials twinkling in the dirt like diamonds. But the strong box, the payroll box, was missing. A groan came from the far side of the wagon. Eliza scrambled over the debris. A man in a dark suit lay half-pinned under the wagon bed. It was not a soldier or a driver. It was a clerk she had seen at the mine office. He was clutching a thick leather satchel to his chest, as if it contained his own soul. "Help me," he wheezed. His face was gray, the color of ash. Eliza dropped to her knees, opening her bag. "I am a nurse. Let me see." He gripped her wrist with shocking strength. "No time. They dressed like them, but they spoke English." "Who?" Eliza asked, trying to pry his hand from the bag to check his injuries. "Crow's men." The man gasped. Blood bubbled at the corner of his lips. "Take it, the ledger, and the map." "Do not let Rourke have it. They will poison." The man shuddered once, a violent convulsion that rattled his teeth. And then he was still. His hand went slack, releasing the satchel. Eliza stared at him. The silence of the desert rushed back in, heavy and oppressive. They dressed like them. She looked at the arrow and the driver again. It was a theater, a bloody stage play designed to look like an Apache raid. She looked at the satchel. It was heavy. She unbuckled the strap with trembling fingers. Inside was a thick book bound in black leather and a rolled parchment. She pulled the parchment out halfway. It was a map of the river basin, stamped with the official seal of the territory surveyor, but covered in red ink lines that diverted the main flow directly into the intake pipes of the Crow silver mine. At the bottom were two signatures, Silas Crow and Captain Rourke. It was a death warrant for the valley. "Well now, that looks too heavy for a lady to carry." The voice came from behind her, low and scratching like gravel. Eliza spun around, clutching the satchel to her chest. A rider had appeared from the scrub brush. He sat atop a large roan horse, his hands resting casually on the pommel of his saddle. He wore a long duster coat despite the heat, and a low-slung gun belt. His hair was long and greasy, hanging around a face that looked like it had been carved from granite and left out in the rain too long. Hawk Danner. She had seen him in the saloon, drinking alone. He was a bounty hunter, a man who sold heads for cash. "Mr. Danner," Eliza said, her voice surprisingly steady. "There has been an attack. These men are dead." "Tragedy," Danner said, though his eyes did not look tragic. They looked hungry. They were fixed on the leather bag in her arms. "Damn Apaches. Savage animals. All of them. I will take that bag in for evidence. Miss Hart, Captain Rourke will want to see it." "I can deliver it myself," Eliza said, taking a step backward. Her heel caught on a rock. Danner smiled, revealing yellowed teeth. "I insist. That is government property now, and you are a long way from town." He nudged his horse forward. The animal snorted, sensing the tension. Eliza looked at the ridge where Thomas and the buckboard had been. They were gone. The boy had run. She was alone. "The clerk said they spoke English," Eliza said, watching Danner's hand inch toward his holster. "He said they were Crow's men." Danner's smile vanished. He was delirious. "Miss Hart, dying men say foolish things. Now give me the bag, or I will have to assume you are stealing from the dead." Eliza threw the medical kit at the horse's head. It was a desperate, foolish move, but it worked. The heavy bag struck the roan on the nose. The horse reared, screaming, and Danner cursed, fighting to stay in the saddle. Eliza turned and ran. She did not run back toward the road. A horse would run her down in seconds on the flat ground. She ran toward the jagged tear in the earth that marked the river canyon. The terrain there was steep, choked with mesquite and loose shale. "Get back here," Danner roared behind her. A gunshot cracked, the sound enormous in the open air. A spray of dirt kicked up 5 feet to her left. Eliza did not scream. She saved her breath. She scrambled down the slope, sliding on the loose scree, her dress snagged on thorns, tearing the hem. The leather satchel banged against her hip, a heavy, awkward weight. She could hear the horse crashing through the brush above her. Danner was coming. She reached a narrow deer trail that wound down toward the water. The river was close now, the sound of rushing water filling her ears. She needed to cross, if she could get to the other side, into the deep rocks where a horse could not follow. She might stand a chance. The mud along the bank was slick, treacherous clay hidden under a layer of dry dust. Eliza lunged for a handhold on a willow branch, missed, and her boots went out from under her. The world tilted. The sky swapped places with the ground. She slid 10 feet down the muddy bank, a chaotic tumble of skirts and limbs, and launched off a mossy ledge. She hit the water hard. The cold was a shock that drove the air from her lungs. She went under, the weight of her skirts and the heavy satchel dragging her down. The current grabbed her, spinning her around. She fought, kicking wildly, her hands clawing at the water. She broke the surface, gasping, coughing up water. Her hair had come loose from its pins, plastering across her face in a wet, tangled curtain. She flailed, her feet finding purchase on the smooth river stones. She stood up, shaking, the water waist-deep and swirling around her hips. Her gray dress was soaked through, clinging to her skin like a second layer of flesh, heavy and transparent in the sunlight. She wiped the water from her eyes, panic still hammering in her chest, ready to scramble up the opposite bank. Then she froze. She was not alone. 10 feet away, in a quiet pool protected by a ring of boulders, a man was standing. He had been bathing. The water around him was calm, rippling gently away from his torso. His skin was the color of bronze in the sunlight, slick with water. He was broad-shouldered, lean muscle defined under the wet sheen of his skin. His hair was black and heavy, wet against his neck. It was the Apache. Nantan, Eliza gasped, her hands instinctively flying up to cover her chest, though the wet fabric of her dress offered little modesty. She stood there, dripping, shivering, holding the stolen satchel like a shield, caught between a murderer on the ridge and a warrior in the water. Nantan did not flinch. He did not lunge for the knife that lay on a flat rock within his reach. He simply stood there, waist-deep in the river, looking at her. His face was unreadable, his dark eyes taking in her disheveled state, the terror in her posture, the way her chest heaved with every desperate breath. He looked at the ridge above her, where the sound of Danner's horse was getting louder. Then he looked back at her, slowly, deliberately. He began to move toward the bank. He stepped out of the water, unashamed of his nakedness, though he reached for his buckskin breeches lying on the rock and pulled them on with a fluid, efficient grace. Eliza could not look away, nor could she speak. She was paralyzed by the sudden, intense intimacy of the moment. Nantan turned to her, tying the leather laces of his breeches. He looked at her not with lust, but with a recognition that unsettled her more than Danner's gun. It was the look one gave to a wild thing that had fallen into a trap. He stepped closer to the water's edge, offering a hand. He did not smile, not fully, but the corner of his mouth quivered upward. "You are the only storm I would ever welcome," he said. His voice was low, carrying over the sound of the water. Eliza stared at him, confused, terrified, and strangely anchored by his calm. "There is a man," she choked out. He is coming." "I know," Nantan said. "Hawk Danner. I smell him." The sound of hooves stopped at the top of the ravine. "Hart, I see your tracks." Danner's voice echoed down the canyon walls. Eliza looked up, terror seizing her again. "He will kill me. He wants the bag." Nantan looked at the leather satchel in her hands, then at her eyes. "Do you trust the river?" he asked. "What?" "Do you trust the river?" he repeated, his eyes locking onto hers. Eliza looked at the water, then at him. "Yes." "Then come." He waded into the water toward her. He did not grab her. He waited until she took a single step to close the distance. Then, he took her arm, his grip firm, but not bruising, and pulled her toward the overhang of the canyon wall where the willow branches swept low over the water, creating a green curtain. "Under," he commanded softly. Eliza ducked beneath the curtain of leaves, pressing her back against the cool stone of the canyon wall. Nantan followed her, his body shielding hers from the view of the bank. He was close, too close. Ooh. She could smell the scent of river water, sage and clean skin on him. She could feel the heat radiating from his chest. "Stay still," he whispered. "Breathe through your nose. Quiet." Above them, Danner's boots crunched on the gravel. He was sliding down the bank. I know you are down there. Girl, Danner shouted. You can't swim in that river with a dress like that. You will drown. Eliza trembled. Nantan placed a hand on her shoulder. It was a heavy, grounding weight. He moved his other hand in the water, splashing gently, rhythmically against the mud bank where she had entered, washing away the deep gouges her boots had made. The current took the mud and swirled it away, leaving the bank smooth. Danner appeared on the opposite bank, 20 yards downstream. He scanned the water, his gun drawn. He looked at the rushing current, then at the empty rocks. Damn it, Danner spat. He fired a shot into the water, an angry, futile gesture. The bullet hissed as it hit the surface. He waited for a long minute, watching for a body to float up. When nothing appeared, he holstered his gun. Let the river have you then, he muttered. He turned and began the arduous climb back up the ravine. Eliza let out a breath she had been holding for what felt like an hour. Her knees gave way, and she slid down the rock wall until she was sitting in the shallow water. Nantan stepped back, giving her space. The intensity of the proximity broke, leaving a cold void. Why? Eliza asked, her voice shaking. Why did you help me? Nantan picked up his shirt from the rock and pulled it on. Because you did not scream when you saw me, and because you are carrying something that makes Hawk Danner afraid. Eliza looked down at the wet satchel. It is a ledger and a map. There was an ambush. The wagon. They killed them. They wore feathers. They tried to make it look like... She stopped, looking up at him. Like your people. Nantan's face hardened. The amusement was gone, replaced by the sharp edge of a blade. My people do not leave gold behind, and we do not shoot horses unless we are starving. He looked at the top of the ravine. The robbers were not my people. Someone wants war to get water. The truth of it hung in the air between them. Eliza shivered, the wet dress clinging uncomfortably to her skin. The sun was dipping below the canyon rim, and the air was cooling rapidly. They will come back, Eliza said. Danner will tell Captain Rourke. They will send a patrol. They will, Nantan agreed. If you go back to town now, with that bag, you will never reach the sheriff. Rourke is the law here, and Crow owns the law. I cannot go back, Eliza realized. The thought was terrifying. She had no home, no money, and now, no safety. But I cannot stay here. Nantan looked at her. He assessed her strength, her fear, and the stubborn set of her jaw. The night is coming, he said. The desert is cold. You have two choices. Miss Hart, you can walk back to the road and hope a stranger picks you up before Danner finds you, or you can come with me. With you, Eliza asked. To the reservation. To the high ground, Nantan corrected. Where the water starts. Where the lies cannot reach yet. He extended a hand again. Eliza looked at his hand. It was rough, calloused, a warrior's hand. But it was open. She thought of the civilized men in town: Crow with his silk suit, Rourke with his uniform, Danner with his badge. They were the ones who had slaughtered the men on the wagon. They were the savages. She looked at the satchel. The evidence inside could save the river. It could save the people Nantan was trying to protect. She took his hand. I will come, she said. Nantan nodded once. He did not smile this time. Keep your head down and walk where I walk. We leave no tracks tonight. He turned and began to move upstream, moving through the shadows of the canyon like smoke. Eliza squeezed the water from her heavy skirt, gripped the leather handle of the satchel until her fingers ached, and followed him into the deepening dark. Behind them, the telegraph wire hummed in the wind, carrying a lie to the Fort Apache raid. Payroll stolen. Nurse missing. Send cavalry. The war had begun. But for the first time, the river had a witness. The climb into the high country was a test of endurance that stripped away the last remnants of Eliza Hart's previous life. Her boots, designed for the cobblestones of Philadelphia, were scuffed and thin against the unforgiving shale of the Dragoon Mountains. By the time Nantan signaled for them to stop, the moon was high and white, casting long, skeletal shadows across the twisted juniper trees. They had reached a plateau hidden behind a natural fortress of granite spires. This was not a war camp, but a sanctuary. Several Wickiups' domed shelters made of brush and canvas sat clustered near a spring that bubbled up from the rock. "Stay here," Nantan said. His voice was low. "Do not speak until I speak for you." Eliza nodded, clutching the heavy leather satchel to her chest. She felt exposed. Figures emerged from the shelters, silent and wraith-like. Women wrapped in blankets, children with wide, dark eyes, and a few old men who moved with the stiffness of old injuries. They did not look at her with curiosity. They looked at her with a profound, terrifying stillness. To them, she was not a guest. She was a portent. She was a white woman brought into their hidden heart. In 1879, white people brought only two things: disease and soldiers. An older woman stepped forward. Her hair was streaked with gray, braided severely down her back. Her face was a map of deep lines, etched by sun and grief, but her eyes were sharp as flint. This was Mara. She looked at Nantan, then at Eliza, her gaze lingering on the muddy hem of Eliza's dress and the fear in her posture. "You bring a storm bird to the nest, Nantan," Mara said. Her English was heavily accented but clear. "Does she not know her kind burns nests? She carries the truth of the river," Nantan replied. He did not bow, but his tone held respect. "And the soldiers hunt her." "The soldiers hunt us all," Mara spat. She turned her back on Eliza. "If she stays, she works. We have no food for idle mouths." It was a cold welcome, but it was a reprieve. Nantan led Eliza to a small, empty shelter on the edge of the circle. "Sleep," he told her. "You are safe here." "Am I?" Eliza asked, looking at the backs of the people who refused to acknowledge her. "They do not hate you," Nantan said, his face impassive. "They fear what follows you. Prove them wrong." He turned and walked away into the darkness, leaving her alone with the ledger and the silence. The next morning brought a gray, heavy sky. The heat had broken, replaced by a brooding humidity that promised violence. Eliza was awakened not by the sun, but by the sound of a horse approaching. She scrambled out of the Wickiup, clutching the satchel. It was old Thomas, the station keeper she had heard about. He was riding a mule, leading a pack horse that looked familiar. Lashed to the pack animal's back was her heavy camera case and her medical bag. Eliza ran forward, forgetting her caution. "My equipment." Thomas tipped his wide-brimmed hat. He had a face like a dried apple, and eyes that had seen everything the territory had to offer. "I went to the wreck, Miss Hart. Danner had already left to tell his lies to the captain. I thought you might need your tools. The camera box is cracked, but the glass seems whole." "Thank you," Eliza breathed, checking the medical bag. The vials were intact. "How did you know where to find us?" "I have known Nantan since he was a boy," Thomas said. He dismounted stiffly. "And I know where the water goes." He turned to Nantan, who had emerged from the brush. The two men clasped forearms. "The wire is hot," Thomas said gravely. "Rourke has sent a patrol to the east, toward the reservations. He claims the Apache raided the wagon. He is using it to stir up the town. They are calling for a clearance." "A clearance," Nantan repeated. The word tasted like ash. It meant forced removal. It meant death. "Crow is pushing him," Thomas added. "The mine needs the water now. They plan to blast the levee in 3 days. Eliza stepped forward. 3 days. "If they blast the levee," Nantan said, looking toward the distant peaks, "the river will flood the mine's intake and leave this valley dry. The fish will die, the deer will leave, and we will be forced to beg for water at the agency." "I have the proof," Eliza said, patting the satchel. "The ledger." "Paper burns," Mara said, appearing behind them. She carried a basket of roots. "And white men's laws are made of paper." Before Eliza could argue, a cry cut through the camp. It was a high, thin sound of distress. A young woman rushed out of a nearby Wickiup, holding a child in her arms. The boy, no more than 5 years old, was limp. His skin flushed a dangerous crimson. Mara dropped her basket and ran. Eliza followed instinctively. The boy was burning up. His breath came in short, rattling gasps. Mara began to chant, reaching for a pouch of pollen, but the mother looked terrified. "He has heat sickness," Mara said. "The spirit fire is in him." Eliza knelt beside the boy. She touched his forehead. It was scorching. "It is not a spirit," she said, her voice dropping into her professional cadence. "It is a fever, likely from the bad water downriver. If we do not cool him down, he will seize." The mother looked at Mara, then at Nantan. "Letter," Nantan said. It was not a request. Eliza opened her medical bag. She worked with a focus that shut out the hostile stares. She mixed willow bark powder, nature's aspirin, with a little water. "I need cool water," she ordered. "And clothes, quickly." For the next 4 hours, Eliza waged a war against the fever. She stripped the boy down, bathing him constantly with cool water from the spring. She forced small drops of the willow tincture between his lips. She did not flinch when he vomited. She did not stop to wipe the sweat from her own brow. Nantan watched from the entrance of the shelter. He saw hands that were steady. He saw a woman who was not afraid of the ugliness of sickness. She was not a delicate flower from the east. She was a healer. By late afternoon, the fever broke. The boy fell into a natural sleep, his breathing deep and even. Eliza sat back on her heels, exhausted. She looked up to find Mara standing over her. The old woman did not smile. She simply handed Eliza a gourd of water. "You have useful hands," Mara said. It was the highest praise Eliza could have received. She drank the water, feeling the cool liquid soothe her parched throat. She was no longer a stranger. She was useful. She had been allowed into the circle of firelight. That evening, the storm that had been threatening all day finally broke. It began with a drop in temperature that sent a shiver through the canyon. Then the sky opened up. Rain fell in sheets, cold and relentless, turning the dust to mud in seconds. Thunder echoed off the canyon walls like artillery fire. Nantan found Eliza sitting near the fire, trying to read the ledger by the flickering light. "We must move," he said. "The wash will flood." He led her to a shallow cave higher up the rock face, a natural indentation that offered shelter from the wind and rain. It was a tight space. They had to sit close, their shoulders almost touching. Eliza shivered. Her dress was damp from the humidity, and the temperature had dropped 20 degrees in an hour. She hugged her knees to her chest, trying to stop her teeth from chattering. Nantan watched her. He unrolled a thick wool blanket he had brought from his own bedding. He did not wrap it around her. He held it out. "Take it," he said. Eliza took the rough wool and wrapped it around herself. "Thank you. Aren't you cold?" "I am used to the wind," Nantan said. He sat near the mouth of the cave, his profile silhouetted against the flashes of lightning. He sat with one knee up, his arm resting on it, looking out at the storm. He was close enough that she could smell the rain on his skin and the scent of pine smoke in his hair. But he kept a deliberate distance. It was a line drawn in the sand. He would protect her, but he would not cross into her space. Eliza felt a strange ache in her chest. It was not fear. It was a longing for him to bridge that gap, mixed with the terrified realization that she wanted him to. "I read the book," Eliza said softly, needing to fill the silence. "The ledger," Nantan turned his head slightly. "And it is all there," she said. "Crow is paying Captain Rourke $500 a month to look the other way. They are buying dynamite from a supplier in Tucson. And there is a shipment of chemicals listed. Cyanide, mercury, things used to separate silver from rock. Things that kill the river," Nantan said. "Yes, they are poisoning the water intentionally to drive your people away from the lower valley. Then, once you are gone, they will divert the flow." She hesitated. "There is a letter tucked in the back, from the territorial governor. He knows. He is taking a percentage." Nantan laughed, a bitter, sharp sound. "So there is no law we can go to." "There is the press," Eliza said. "There are newspapers in San Francisco or Denver. If we can get this proof to them, if we can show them that this is not a savage war, but a business transaction, the public outcry could stop them." "Public outcry," Nantan mused. "Do your people care about Apaches? They care about corruption, Eliza said. And they care about water rights. If farmers downstream know their water is being stolen and poisoned, they will fight. Lightning flashed, illuminating Nantan's face. He looked at her, searching for deceit. You believe this, he said. I have to, Eliza whispered. Otherwise, what are we fighting for? Nantan looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached out, not to touch her, but to place a piece of wood on the small fire between them. The flame flared up, casting a warm glow on his face. You fight for the truth, Nantan said. I fight for the land, maybe, for now. That is the same thing. He leaned back against the rock. Sleep, Eliza Hart, the storm will pass. He had used her name. It felt intimate, like a touch. Eliza pulled the blanket tighter, watching him watch the rain. He was a sentinel, a guardian, and for the first time in her life, she felt completely safe in the presence of a man. The morning brought a world washed clean. The sky was a piercing, innocent blue. The sagebrush smelled sharp and sweet. Eliza stepped out of the cave and looked down at the river valley far below. The river was swollen, brown and churning, angry with the storm runoff. The water is high, Nantan said, appearing beside her. It covers the tracks of the lie. Eliza looked at her camera case. An idea formed in her mind, sharp and clear. The ledger is words, she said. People can claim words are forged. They can claim I wrote it myself. So I need a witness that cannot lie, she said. She pointed to the river. I need to take a picture, a photograph of the river as it is now. And if we can, a photograph of the intake pipes they are building. Proof of the crime in progress. Nantan looked at the bulky camera. That box captures spirits. It captures light, Eliza corrected. It captures exactly what is there. It is the only thing a judge in the city might believe over a captain's word. It is heavy, Nantan noted. I can carry it, Eliza said stubbornly. Nantan picked up the heavy tripod and the box of glass plates. He hoisted them onto his shoulder as if they weighed nothing. We go together. They hiked down a narrow goat path toward a ridge overlooking the mine's diversion site. It was dangerous ground, close to the town, close to the patrols. When they reached the vantage point, Eliza set to work. The process was arduous. She had to coat the glass plate with collodion, sensitize it in silver nitrate, rush it to the camera in a light-proof holder, expose it, and then develop it immediately before the plate dried. It smelled of ether and lavender oil. Nantan watched her hands. They were stained black with silver nitrate, quick and precise. She was a warrior in her own way, wielding chemistry instead of arrows. She ducked under the black viewing cloth. Stay still, she whispered to the landscape. She exposed the plate for 4 seconds. When she developed it in her portable dark tent, the image emerged, the river, the wooden pilings of the illegal dam, and the blurry figures of men working on it. It was ghostly, black and white, but it was undeniable. It is done, she said, holding the wet plate by the edges. We must go, Nantan said urgently. Thomas is signaling. He pointed to the distant ridge where a mirror flashed in the sun. 3 long flashes. What does it mean? Eliza asked, packing her gear frantically. Soldiers, Nantan said. Many of them. And they are not heading for the reservation. Where are they going? They are going to the box canyon, Nantan said, his voice cold. Where the winter food stores are kept. Where the old ones are hiding. Eliza froze. But why? Because Rourke knows he cannot find the ledger, Nantan said. So he will burn everything until we come out to fight him. He wants a war. Eliza, and he is going to start it tonight. Eliza looked at the glass plate, then at the ledger in her bag. If they attack, you will fight back. We must, Nantan said. And if you fight, you play right into his hands. Eliza realized. He will use the violence to justify bringing in the whole regiment. He will wipe you out. She grabbed Nantan's arm. This time, she was the one bridging the distance. We cannot let them fight, she said fiercely. We have to stop this. I have to get this evidence to someone who can stop Rourke, not a judge in the city. That will take weeks. I need someone now. Who? Nantan asked. The telegraph, Eliza said. If I can get to the office in Red Hearth, if I can wire the image. No, I cannot wire a picture. But I can wire the text of the governor's letter to the marshal in Tucson. I can transcribe the ledger. Red Hearth is a trap for you, Nantan said. Crow has a price on your head. $500. Same as Rourke. Then I am worth more than I thought, Eliza said, her jaw setting. Take me back, Nantan. Take me to the town. Nantan looked at her hand on his arm. He covered it with his own. His skin was warm, his grip strong. I will not take you to your death, he said. No, Eliza said, meeting his eyes. You are taking me to save your river, and I am the only storm that can do it. Nantan smiled then, a rare, genuine smile that reached his eyes. Then let us make it a good storm. They turned away from the safety of the high ground, descending back toward the smoke and dust of Red Hearth, where the truth was worth its weight in blood. Red Hearth at night was a beast that slept with one eye open. The air hung heavy with the smell of coal smoke, unwashed bodies, and the metallic tang of crushed ore. Eliza and Nantan moved through the shadows of the livery stable, the stench of manure and damp hay masking their scent. They had slipped past the perimeter guards by wading through the drainage ditch that ran behind the assay office, a humiliation that left Eliza's skirt heavy with muck. But she no longer cared about dignity. She cared about survival. Quiet, Nantan whispered, pressing her back against the rough wood of a stall. Horses smell fear. Above them, on the loft floor, boots clumped heavily. I want the perimeter doubled, a voice growled. It was Captain Rourke. Eliza recognized the clipped, military cadence. If that Apache buck and the woman are not found by dawn, I am burning the canyon. I will not have my reputation stained by a nursemaid and a savage. Burn it all you want, Captain. A smoother, oilier voice replied. Silas Crow. Just make sure the diversion tunnel is clear. We blast at noon. The investors in Boston are getting impatient. They want to see silver, not water rights disputes. Eliza's breath hitched. Noon. They had less than 12 hours. And the ledger. Rourke asked. Danner will find it. Or he won't get paid. It does not matter. Who would believe a woman who ran off with an Indian? We control the narrative. Captain, we control the wire. They moved away, their voices fading into the general din of the town. Nantan looked at Eliza in the gloom. His eyes were hard, reflecting the sliver of moonlight coming through the slats. Noon, he mouthed. They moved again, slipping out the back of the stable and into the alleyway. Their destination was the small schoolhouse behind the church. Reverend Klein lived there. He was a man of letters, the town's only teacher, and the one person Eliza had thought might possess enough moral spine to stand against Crow. They found the Reverend in his study, grading papers by the light of a kerosene lamp. When Nantan stepped out of the shadows, Klein dropped his pen, his face draining of color. Do not scream, Nantan said, his hand resting on the hilt of his knife. Reverend, Eliza stepped forward, keeping her voice low. We need your help. We have proof. Klein stared at her, then at the Apache warrior standing in his study. He looked terrified, sweat beading instantly on his upper lip. Miss Hart, you are wanted. They say you were kidnapped. I was not kidnapped, Eliza said, placing the heavy satchel on his desk. She pulled out the ledger. I was saved. This book, Reverend, details the bribes. It proves Crow is poisoning the river. We need you to keep it safe. We need you to send a message to the marshal in Tucson. Klein looked at the ledger as if it were a rattlesnake. He did not touch it. Crow built this school. Miss Hart. He pays for the hymnals. He is the town. He is a murderer, Eliza hissed. He killed the men on the supply wagon. And if I help you, Klein's voice trembled, who protects me when the soldiers come you him? He gestured vaguely at Nantan. I simply cannot. He stood up, backing away toward the window. You must go. Please, before anyone sees you here. You are a man of God, Eliza said, feeling a cold knot of despair in her stomach. I am a man who wants to live, Klein whispered. He reached for the cord of the window drapes. for a second. Eliza thought he was closing them. Instead, he yanked them open, exposing the lit room to the street. "Go!" Nantan shoved Eliza toward the back door just as a shout went up from the street. "Lighten the schoolhouse. Someone is inside." They burst out into the alley, the cool night air hitting their faces. "He betrayed us," Eliza gasped, stumbling over a discarded crate. "He is a frightened man," Nantan said, pulling her upright. "Fear makes men deaf to God." They ran toward the main thoroughfare. It was risky, but the alleys were becoming a trap. They needed to get to the telegraph office. It was their last throw of the dice. As they skirted the edge of the saloon, a commotion spilled out onto the boardwalk. A miner, his face caked in red dust, was being dragged out by two of Crow's enforcers. "I just said the water tastes like copper," the miner yelled, spitting blood. "My girl is sick from it, that ain't right." One of the enforcers drove a boot into the man's ribs. The crack was audible, even over the piano music from inside. "The water's fine. Drunkard, Mr. Crow says it's the finest in the territory. You calling Mr. Crow a liar?" The miner curled into a ball, sobbing. The crowd on the porch watched. No one moved. No one spoke. Eliza felt a hand on her arm. Nantan pulled her back into the shadows. "Do not look," he said. "You cannot save him tonight. They are monsters," Eliza whispered, tears stinging her eyes. "They are men with power," Nantan corrected. "Come, the wire." The telegraph office was a small shack near the depot. The operator was gone for the night, the door locked. Nantan did not hesitate. He used the hilt of his knife to shatter the pane of glass in the back door, reaching in to unlock it. Inside, the smell of ozone and paper filled the air. The telegraph key sat silent on the desk. "Do you know how to use it?" Nantan asked, watching the street through the cracked window. "I watched the operator in Philadelphia," Eliza said. "I know the code for help, SOS, and I can tap out the words." She sat at the desk, her fingers trembling. She began to tap, ... dash, dash, ... "To us Marshal Tucson. Crow poisoning water. Rourke complicit. Evidence secured. Send help. Heart." She repeated it. Once. Twice. "Someone is coming," Nantan warned. Eliza looked down at the ledger open beside her. In the flickering light of the match she had struck, her eyes caught a signature on the bottom of a payroll page she had not noticed before. It was a receipt for recruitment services. Arthur Sterling. The world seemed to stop spinning. Arthur Sterling was the broker in Philadelphia, the kind, fatherly man who had found her this job, who had told her the West was a place for a fresh start. He wasn't just a recruiter. He was on Crow's payroll. He had sent her here not as a nurse, but as a piece of inventory, or perhaps a disposable witness to make the mine look legitimate on paper before the accident. "He knew," Eliza whispered, horror cold in her veins. "He knew what I was walking into." "Eliza," Nantan's voice was a whip crack. The front door kicked open. Hawk Danner stood there, filling the frame. He held a Colt Navy revolver in each hand, the barrels gleaming. "Evening, Miss Hart," Danner drawled. "Step away from the key." Eliza froze, her hand hovering over the brass tapper. "I don't care about the wire," Danner said, stepping into the room. "The lines are cut 5 miles out. I did that an hour ago. You have been tapping into ghosts." Eliza's heart plummeted. "Give me the bag," Danner said, holstering one gun and holding out a hand. "I have a buyer in Mexico who pays better than Crow. This little war of yours is about to make me a rich man." "No," Nantan said. He stepped out from the shadows of the corner, moving with a speed that defied logic. Danner fired. The shot was deafening in the small room. Nantan twisted, the bullet tearing through the fleshy part of his left shoulder, spinning him around, but he did not fall. He used the momentum to launch himself at Danner. They crashed into the desk, sending the telegraph key and the ledger flying. It was a brawl of desperate violence. Danner was strong, a brawler, but Nantan fought like water fluid, relentless, striking where there was no defense. Nantan slammed Danner's wrist against the floorboards. Forcing the gun from his hand, Danner headbutted him, blood spraying from Nantan's nose. "Run, Eliza!" Nantan shouted, struggling to keep Danner pinned. Eliza grabbed the ledger. She looked at the door. She could run. She could disappear into the dark and maybe, just maybe, survive. But Nantan was bleeding, and Danner was reaching for a boot knife. Eliza grabbed the heavy brass telegraph key unit, ripping the wires loose, with a scream of rage that startled even herself. She brought it down on the back of Danner's head. There was a sickening thud. Danner slumped forward, unconscious. Nantan shoved the heavy body off him and scrambled up. He was breathing hard, blood streaming from his shoulder and nose. He looked at Eliza, his eyes wide. "You stayed," he said, sounding genuinely shocked. "I am the storm, remember," Eliza said, her voice shaking. She dropped the brass instrument. "We have to go." They stumbled out into the night, but the gunshot had drawn attention. Shouts were echoing from the barracks. "This way!" Nantan gasped, clutching his shoulder. He led her not out of town, but deeper into it, into the labyrinth of shacks near the Chinese laundry. They found an abandoned root cellar behind a burned-out store. Nantan kicked the door open, and they collapsed into the darkness, the smell of damp earth and old potatoes surrounding them. Eliza fumbled for her medical bag, which she had miraculously kept slung over her shoulder. "Light," she whispered. "I need light." Nantan struck a match. The flame illuminated his face, pale beneath the bronze skin. The bullet wound in his shoulder was bleeding sluggishly, dark and ugly. "It went through," Nantan grunted, looking down. "Clean." "Nothing about a gunshot is clean," Eliza snapped, her hands finding their rhythm. "Sit still." She tore a strip from her petticoat. The lace was ruined anyway. She poured the last of the alcohol from her kit onto the wound. Nantan hissed, his back arching, muscles pulling taut as steel cables. "Breathe," Eliza commanded, her fingers working quickly to pack the wound and bind it. She tied the knot tight. Nantan slumped back against the dirt wall, his chest heaving. Eliza sat back, her hands covered in his blood. The adrenaline began to fade, leaving them both trembling. The space was tiny. Their knees were touching. Nantan looked at her. The barrier he had maintained the respectful distance. The partnership was crumbling. He reached out with his good hand and touched her cheek. His thumb brushed away a smudge of dirt near her lip. "You could have run," he said softly. "You could have left me to him." "I was not hired to leave people behind," Eliza said. Her voice was barely a whisper. She leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering shut for a moment. "And I am tired of men deciding where I go." Nantan's hand moved to the back of her neck, his fingers tangling in her loose hair. He pulled her forward, not with force, but with a question. Eliza answered it. She closed the distance, pressing her forehead against his. They breathed the same air, sharing the heat of their survival. "They will hunt us," Nantan murmured against her skin. "Let them," Eliza said. She turned her face, her lips brushing his jawline. "We are still here." He kissed her then. It was not the gentle, courtly kiss of the romance novels she had read in Philadelphia. It tasted of blood, dust, and desperation. It was a claiming, a fierce acknowledgement that in a world trying to kill them, they were vividly, definitely alive. Eliza's hands gripped his arms, feeling the strength in them. For a moment, the mine, the ledger, and the wire did not exist. There was only the dark, the earth, and the man who smelled of rain. But the world outside would not be ignored. Boots thundered on the ground above their heads. "Search every shack," Captain Rourke's voice boomed, terrifyingly close. "They are rats in a hole. Smoke them out if you have to." Nantan pulled back, his eyes instantly clearing. The warrior was back. "He is preparing the attack," Nantan whispered. "He is using the search as a cover to move his men into position for the dawn raid." "The blast," Eliza said, remembering. "Noon tomorrow. If we stay here, we die," Nantan said. "If we leave, they see us." "We need a distraction," Eliza said. She looked at her medical bag, a bottle of ether, a box of matches. "Can you ride with that shoulder?" she asked. I can ride with no arms if I have to, Nantan said. Good. Eliza began to rig a fuse to the ether bottle. Because I think it is time we gave Captain Rourke the fire he is asking for. 10 minutes later, the abandoned store above them erupted in a fireball of blue and orange flame. The explosion shattered the night, sending horses rearing and soldiers shouting. In the chaos, 2 figures slipped out of the root cellar, stealing 2 cavalry mounts from the hitching rail. They galloped out of Red Hearth, not toward the safety of the wilderness, but toward the river. Behind them, Captain Rourke stood amidst the confusion, his face twisted in a rictus of fury. "Let them run," he screamed to his lieutenant. "Post the notices Eliza Hart is a traitor to the territory, $500 for her head, and tell the men to prep the dynamite. We blow the levees at dawn." The timeline had moved up. Noon was gone. They had until sunrise. As they rode into the dark, the wind whipping Eliza's hair, she realized she had left her old self back in that cellar. The nurse from Philadelphia was gone. The woman riding beside the Apache warrior was something new. Something forged in fire. She was the storm. And she was ready to break. The dawn did not break. It shattered. The sky over Dry Creek Basin was a bruised purple, swollen with rain that refused to fall, trapped by a humidity so thick it felt like a hand around the throat. Eliza Hart sat in the corner of Captain Rourke's office at the military outpost. Her hands were not bound. A courtesy Rourke likely thought proved his civility, but the soldier standing guard at the door made her status clear. She was a prisoner. She had surrendered 3 miles out of town. It had been the only choice. Nantan's shoulder wound had reopened, his blood soaking the flank of his stolen horse. The patrol had been closing in. Eliza had slapped the rump of Nantan's horse, sending him into the dense scrub of the foothills. And then she had turned her own mount to face the soldiers, drawing their fire and their attention. Now, she waited. The door opened, and Captain Rourke entered, followed by Silas Crow. Crow looked immaculate in a fresh suit. Despite the early hour, Rourke looked like a man who had not slept, his eyes hard and red-rimmed. "The Indian is dead, we assume," Rourke said, pulling off his gloves. "My men found a horse with a blood-soaked saddle. He likely crawled into a hole to die." Eliza kept her face a mask, though her heart hammered against her ribs. Nantan was not dead. She refused to believe it. "And the ledger?" Crow asked, his voice tight. "She did not have it on her." "I hid it," Eliza lied. Her voice was steady, surprising her. "Somewhere you will never look. Somewhere it will be found by the right people if I do not return." Crow laughed, but it was a nervous sound. "There are no right people, Miss Hart. There is only us. And in 2 hours, when the storm breaks, we are blowing the levee. The river will be mine. And whatever proof you think you have will be buried under tons of rock and water." "You are poisoning the water," Eliza said. "I saw the barrels. Cyanide. You are dumping it into the tributary creek to simulate an Apache attack on the water supply. You want to kill the river to justify stealing it." "It is a necessary sacrifice," Crow said, checking his pocket watch. "Progress is messy." "I can give you the ledger," Eliza said, playing her card. She stood up, feigning a tremble. She did not have to fake entirely. "But I want a deal. I want safe passage to Tucson. And I want to send a telegram to my family, to tell them I am coming home." Rourke looked at Crow. "If she gives us the book, we will end this clean." "Fine," Crow said. "Write your telegram. But the operator sends it, and you do not leave this room until the book is in my hand." Eliza moved to the desk. She wrote a message on the pad. It was not to her family. It was a sequence of nonsense words that concealed a code she had seen Nantan use with the mirror signals. She prayed the operator was lazy, or that old Tomas was listening to the wire somewhere down the line. As she wrote, she glanced at the map on the wall. The charges were set at the narrowest point of the canyon. The detonation was set for 12 o'clock, but the storm outside was intensifying. Lightning flickered, white and jagged. Suddenly, a soldier burst into the room. "Sir, fire at the stables and shadows. The men say they see shadows moving inside the perimeter. Rourke drew his revolver. "It is him! The Apache!" Eliza's heart soared. He was alive. "Secure the prisoner!" Rourke shouted. "Crow! Get to the river. Start the sequence. We blow it now." The office dissolved into chaos. In the confusion, the door swung open again, and Hawk Danner stepped in. He wasn't looking at Rourke. He was looking at Eliza. "The bag," Danner hissed, grabbing Eliza's arm. "You hid it near the junction. I saw the tracks. Tell me exactly where, or I leave you here for Rourke." "I don't have it," Eliza cried. "Liar!" Danner shoved her toward the door. "We are leaving. You are going to take me to it." He dragged her out into the compound. The rain had finally started, falling in torrential sheets that turned the dust to instant mud. Smoke from the burning stables drifted across the ground like fog. Danner pulled her toward the horses, but a Figer dropped from the roof of the supply shed, landing silently in the mud between them. It was Nantan. He looked like a spirit risen from the earth. He was stripped to the waist, his chest painted with ash and clay. A bandage was wrapped tight around his shoulder, dark with fresh blood. He held a Winchester rifle in one hand and a knife in the other. Behind him, 3 other Apache warriors emerged from the smoke, not a war party, but a surgical team. "Let her go," Nantan said. The thunder rolled overhead, masking the sound of his voice, but Danner heard it. Danner laughed, leveling his gun at Eliza's head. "You don't have a shot. Chief, drop the rifle." Nantan did not drop the rifle. He looked at Eliza. There was no fear in his eyes, only a terrifying calculation. "Eliza," he said. "The ground." Eliza dropped. She threw herself into the mud without hesitation. Nantan fired. The bullet took Danner's hat off, grazing his scalp. Danner screamed, firing blindly as he fell back. Nantan lunged, not at Danner, but at Eliza. He hauled her up with his good arm. "Run," he commanded. "To the river. Crow is already there." They ran. The storm was a physical weight now. The wind screaming through the canyon. Behind them. Gunfire erupted as Rourke's men engaged the small Apache force. It was a distraction, a delaying action to buy them time. They reached the riverbank, gasping for air. The water was a roaring brown beast, swollen by the rain, tearing at its banks. Up ahead, near the wooden diversion dam, lanterns bobbed in the dark. Crow's men were shouting, struggling with crates of dynamite in the slick mud. "They are setting the fuses," Eliza shouted over the wind. "We have to stop them," Nantan said. He stumbled, his legs buckling. The loss of blood was taking its toll. "You can't fight them all," Eliza said, gripping his arm. "I do not have to fight them," Nantan said. "I just have to cut the wire." He moved toward the dam, moving from rock to rock. Eliza followed, her hand clutching the pocket of her dress where she had hidden the glass plate negative the photograph she had taken yesterday. The ledger was gone, lost in the capture, but she had saved the image. Suddenly, a shot rang out. Nantan spun around, hit in the leg. He fell hard onto the wet stones. Captain Rourke stepped out from behind a boulder, his service revolver smoking. He was alone, his face twisted in a mask of hatred. "Enough," Rourke roared. "It ends here." He aimed the gun at Nantan's chest. Nantan tried to rise, but his body betrayed him. He looked up at Rourke, his eyes defiant. "Kill me," Nantan said. "The river still sees you. The river belongs to men with vision." Rourke spat. He cocked the hammer. "No!" Eliza screamed. She stepped between them, holding up her hands. "Move, Miss Hart," Rourke warned, "or I will shoot you too." "You want the proof?" Eliza shouted. She reached into her dress not for the glass plate, but for the folded pages she had managed to tear from the ledger before she was captured. It was the section with Rourke's signature. "I have it right here." Rourke's eyes flickered to the papers. "Give them to me." "Come and get them." Eliza backed away, toward the raging water. The river swirled inches from her boots, black and deadly. "Eliza, no," Nantan groaned. "You want the truth, Captain," Eliza yelled, the rain plastering her hair to her face. "Here is your truth." She did not hand them to him. She threw the pages into the air. The wind caught them. For a second, they fluttered like white birds against the dark storm. Then, they hit the water. The current grabbed them, soaking the ink, dissolving the paper, carrying the evidence away into the dark churn of the rapids. Rourke let out a cry of rage. "You stupid cow, you destroyed it!" "I destroyed the paper," Eliza shouted back. "But you can't destroy what I saw." She pulled the glass plate negative from her pocket. She held it up. A flash of lightning tore the sky apart, a brilliant, blinding fork of white fire that illuminated the entire valley for a heartbeat. In that flash, the glass plate glowed. It was a perfect square of captured truth held against the chaos. But the lightning did more than illuminate. The bolt struck the iron support rod of the diversion dam. 50 yards away, the electricity arc traveled down the wet metal, straight into the crates of dynamite that Crow's men were priming. The world turned white. The explosion was not a sound. It was a physical blow. The ground heaved. A wall of water and rock erupted into the sky. The diversion dam disintegrated. The shock wave knocked Eliza and Rourke off their feet. Nantan covered his head as debris rained down splinters of wood, chunks of rock, and the twisted metal of the mining equipment. The blast had gone off early. Instead of diverting the river into the mine's intake, the explosion had collapsed the mine's main retaining wall. The river, now a frenzied monster, did not turn away. It turned in. "Mine!" Rourke screamed, scrambling up from the mud. Water was pouring into the Crow silver mine, rushing down the shafts, carrying the barrels of poison with it, washing them back into the deep earth where they could hurt no one. The river was reclaiming its bed, and taking the mine with it, down by the wreckage. Silas Crow stood paralyzed as his empire flooded. His men were scrambling up the banks, illuminated by the fires started by the explosion. They were carrying the empty chemical barrels, caught in the stark light of the burning timber. Old Thomas and the sheriff from the neighboring county, who had been riding hard since receiving a cryptic telegraph message regarding a storm bird, crested the ridge just in time to see it. They saw the mine flooding. They saw the men with the poison. And they saw Captain Rourke standing over a wounded Apache and a white woman, his gun raised in a futile gesture of dominance against a world that had just broken his rules. Rourke looked at the ridge. He saw the sheriff. He saw the witnesses. He lowered the gun. Eliza scrambled over to Nantan. He was conscious, but barely. She pressed her hands to his leg, stemming the blood. "The river," Nantan whispered, looking past her. Eliza turned. The water was rushing freely now, cleansing the wound in the earth. The dam was gone. "It is free," Eliza said, tears mixing with the rain on her face. "You saved it." Nantan looked at her, his dark eyes filled with pain and a fierce, quiet pride. "We saved it." The storm raged on, but the lightning had done its work. The conspiracy was broken, washed away by the very force they had tried to tame. Rourke holstered his weapon and turned away, walking into the dark like a ghost. He knew, as they all did, that the morning would bring lawyers and inquiries. He was not arrested yet. Power takes time to dismantle, but he was beaten. Eliza sat in the mud, holding Nantan. As the rain began to soften, she still held the glass plate in her other hand. It was cracked down the middle, but the image held. "You are the storm," Nantan whispered, his head resting on her lap. "No," Eliza said, brushing the wet hair from his forehead. "We are." The river roared its agreement, flowing strong and deep toward the sea, carrying the secrets of the night downstream, leaving only the truth on the banks. The days following the explosion at the Crow silver mine were not marked by the silence of peace, but by the sullen, grinding noise of a town that had broken a tooth and was trying to chew on the pain. The rain had stopped, but the mud remained, a thick, red slurry that coated the streets of Red Hearth like dried blood. Eliza Hart stood on the porch of the solitary hotel, her few remaining belongings packed in the battered medical bag at her feet. The heavy camera case was gone, lost to the river during the frantic run, but the single glass plate negative cracked down the center but still legible was safely tucked inside her bodice, wrapped in a scrap of velvet. She was not a hero. In the eyes of Red Hearth, she was something far worse. She was a traitor. As she stepped off the boardwalk, a glob of spit landed on the hem of her skirt. She did not look down. She looked straight ahead, past the angry faces of the miners' wives and the sullen glares of the men who had lost their wages when the mine flooded. They did not see the poison barrels that had washed up on the sandbar. They only saw the woman who had sided with the Apache and shut down the town's heartbeat. "You should have drowned with him," a woman whispered as Eliza passed. Eliza kept walking. She had an appointment at the sheriff's temporary office, where a circuit judge from Tucson had just arrived, summoned by the chaotic telegraph messages that had leaked before the lines went dead. Judge Thaddeus Blackwood was a man of dry paper and ink, looking out of place in the humidity of the basin. He sat behind a requisition desk, looking at the cracked glass plate Eliza placed before him. Next to it, she laid out her handwritten notes, a transcription of the ledger she had committed to memory before the river took the original pages. "This is a serious accusation, Miss Hart," Judge Blackwood said. Adjusting his spectacles, "You are accusing Captain Rourke of treason and Silas Crow of attempted mass murder." "I am accusing them of what they did," Eliza said. Her voice was hoarse from the smoke and the screaming of the night before. "The mine is flooded. If you send a surveyor down the main shaft, you will find the chemical storage rooms. The barrels are there. The ones that didn't wash away." "Mr. Crow claims the chemicals were for standard processing," the judge said, though he did not look convinced. "And Captain Rourke claims he was conducting a suppression operation against hostile combatants. Combatants who were trying to save the water supply for this town," Eliza countered. "The river is running clear today. Judge, ask yourself why it tasted like copper 2 days ago." The judge sighed, rubbing his temples. "I will take this into evidence, and I will file a report with the territorial governor, but I must warn you, Miss Hart, the wheels of justice turn slowly in the West, and they often crush the people who grease them. I expect nothing from the law that it cannot give," Eliza said. "But the truth is recorded. You cannot unsee that photograph." "No," the judge agreed. "I cannot, but you can no longer stay here. The mine manager has already evicted you from the company housing. The hospital board has revoked your contract. You are destitute, Miss Hart, and you are marked." "I am aware," Eliza said. She picked up her bag. "I did not do it for job security." She walked out into the blinding afternoon sun. She had no money. She had no home. She had been stripped of her reputation and her safety. And yet, for the first time in her life, she felt entirely, terrifyingly weightless. 5 miles away, in the high country where the air was thin and smelled of pine resin, Nantan sat by a fire that was little more than glowing coals. His leg was stiff, wrapped in clean linen and bound with splints, but the bone was whole. The bullet had passed through the muscle. It was the shoulder wound from the fight with Danner that burned with a dull, throbbing heat. He was alive, but his survival had come at a cost. The camp had moved. They were deep in the canyon now, in a place where the horses had to walk single file. The mood in the camp was brittle. "You brought the soldiers to our door," one of the younger warriors said, sharpening a knife with unnecessary force. "We lost 2 horses. The winter stores are low. And for what?" "For a white woman." Nantan looked at the fire. He did not look at the warrior. "For the river," Nantan corrected quietly. "If the dam had stood, there would be no water for the horses, no water for the corn. We would be begging at the agency gates by winter." "The river is safe for now," Mara said. Stepping into the circle, she placed a bowl of stew in Nantan's hands. "But the woman is down there, alone. The wolves will circle her." "She is strong," Nantan said. "She is alone," Mara repeated. "Strength means nothing when you are one blade of grass against the wind. You made her one of us when you took her to the high ground. Do we leave our own behind?" Nantan looked up at the old woman. Her eyes held a challenge. It was the conflict that had been tearing at him since he woke up on the riverbank with Eliza's hands pressing on his wound. By saving her, he had endangered his people. But by abandoning her now, he would be betraying the very honor that made him Apache. "I cannot go into the town," Nantan said. "Rourke will have sharpshooters on every roof." "Then bring her out," Mara said, "before the town eats her." Eliza did not leave Redhearth immediately. She had one final ghost to lay to rest. She needed to retrieve the locket she had pawned 3 days ago to buy food. It held the only picture of her mother. The pawn shop was near the edge of town, close to the ruins of the mine office. As she walked along the ridge overlooking the devastated mining complex, she saw 2 figures standing near the edge of the collapsed intake tunnel. She froze behind a stand of mesquite. It was Silas Crow and Hawk Danner. Danner had a bandage around his head where Nantan's bullet had grazed him. He looked unsteady, but his voice carried on the wind, loud and demanding. "I want my money, Crow!" Danner shouted. "I lost the girl, but I kept my mouth shut about the chemicals. You owe me." Crow stood with his back to Eliza, looking down at the flooded ruin of his empire. He looked small against the destruction. "You failed, Mr. Danner. The girl talked. The judge has the negative. My investors are pulling out." "That ain't my problem," Danner spat. "I did your dirty work. Pay me, or I go to the judge myself and tell him who ordered the ambush on the wagon." Crow turned slowly. He did not look angry. He looked bored. He reached into his coat pocket. Eliza expected a wallet. Crow pulled out a small Derringer pistol. It looked like a toy in his hand. He fired twice, 2 small pops, like firecrackers. Danner looked surprised. He touched his chest, his hand coming away red. He took a step back, his boot catching on the loose shale of the cliff edge. He teetered for a second, his eyes wide and empty, and then he fell backward, tumbling silently into the dark, swirling water of the flooded mine shaft. Crow watched him fall. Then he took out a handkerchief, wiped the small gun, and tossed it into the water after Danner. Eliza pressed her hand over her mouth, backing away slowly. Her heart thundered in her ears. She had seen violence before the wagon, the raid, but this was different. This was the cold, sterile disposal of a human being who had outlived his usefulness. This was the West. There was no loyalty among thieves, and there was no mercy for those who stood in the middle. If she stayed in Redhearth, she would be next. An accident, a fall, a stray bullet. She turned and ran. She did not go to the pawn shop. She did not go to the stagecoach stop. She ran toward the river, toward the only place where the laws of nature made more sense than the laws of men. Night found her shivering in an old trapper's cabin 5 miles upstream, a place Nantan had pointed out to her days ago as an emergency cache. It was barely standing, the roof leaking, but it had a stone hearth and a dry corner. She had managed to start a small fire. She sat huddled before it, her knees drawn up to her chest, staring into the flames. She felt hollowed out. The adrenaline was gone, leaving only a vast, aching loneliness. The door creaked open. Eliza gasped, grabbing a piece of firewood as a weapon. Nantan stood in the doorway. He was leaning heavily on a makeshift crutch of willow wood. He was wet from the rain that had started again, his hair plastered to his neck. "Put down the wood, Eliza," he said softly. "It is me." Eliza dropped the wood. A sob broke from her throat, an ugly, ragged sound she could not suppress. She scrambled up and ran to him. He dropped the crutch and caught her with his good arm. She buried her face in his wet chest, shaking uncontrollably. He smelled of rain, and horse, and blood, and life. "I saw him," she choked out. "Crow! He killed Danner! Just threw him away!" "The snake eats its own tail," Nantan murmured, his hand stroking her hair. "You are safe now." He led her to the fire. They sat on the rough floorboards. Nantan stretched his bad leg out, wincing. Eliza immediately shifted into healer mode, checking his bandages, but he stopped her hand. "The wound is fine," he said. "Look at me." Eliza looked up. In the firelight, his face was all sharp angles and deep shadows. He looked tired, ancient, and incredibly handsome. "You have no home to go back to," Nantan said. It was a statement, not a question. No, Eliza whispered. They call me a traitor. And here, Nantan asked. My people ask why I saved the white woman. They say you are a storm that brings fire. Maybe I am, Eliza said, pulling away slightly. She hugged her arms around herself. I have always been troubled. Nantan, in the east, I was too loud, too stubborn. I ran away because I was afraid of being trapped. And look what I did here. I brought an army down on you. You stopped the poison, Nantan said. I am a mess, Eliza confessed, the tears flowing freely now. I am scared all the time. I feel like I'm carrying a hurricane inside my chest, and everywhere I go, things break. Nantan watched her. He did not offer empty comfort. He did not tell her she was wrong. The desert is dry, he said slowly. It is hard. The rocks do not move. The sun does not show mercy. He reached out and took her hand. His thumb traced the pulse at her wrist. When the storm comes, he continued, it is violent. It breaks the dead branches from the trees. It floods the washes. It scares the rabbits. But after the storm, the flowers bloom. The grass grows. The river runs. He leaned closer, his dark eyes locking onto hers. You are not a disaster. Eliza, you are the rain, and I have been thirsty for a long time. Eliza's breath hitched. The words went straight to the center of her, untying the knot of shame she had carried for years. You could be hurt, she whispered. If you keep me. I am already hurt, Nantan said, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. I can take the pain. The question is, do you want to stay here with nothing but the sky and a man with a bad leg? I don't want to be owned, Eliza said, her voice trembling. I don't want to be kept. I do not keep things, Nantan said. He released her hand, leaving it open on her knee. He sat back slightly, creating a space between them. A choice. I only walk beside them. Eliza looked at the space between them. It was a terrifying distance. It was the distance between her old life of safety and rules and a new life of danger and freedom. She looked at Nantan. He was waiting. He would not grab her. He would not persuade her. She moved. She closed the gap, shifting across the floorboards until her knees bumped him. She reached out and placed her hands on either side of his face. His skin was warm. I choose the storm, she whispered. She kissed him. It was she who initiated it. She pressed her lips to his, tentative at first, then with a deepening hunger. Nantan made a low sound in his throat, and his arm went around her waist, pulling her in. There was no desperation this time, only a profound, aching relief. It was the feeling of coming home to a place she had never been before. His hand moved up her back, firm and claiming, but when she shivered, he paused, waiting for her to settle against him. It was a slow, deliberate unraveling. In the flickering firelight, clothes were loosened not with the frantic tearing of lust, but with the reverence of unveiling a secret. When his skin touched hers, bare and warm, Eliza did not feel taken. She felt found. Outside, the rain fell softly on the roof, washing away the blood of the day, sealing them into their own private world. 2 weeks later, the news filtered up to the high country through Old Tomas. Captain Rourke had not been arrested. The military, protective of its own, had transferred him to a desolate outpost in the Dakota Territory. It was a punishment, a career ender, but it was not a prison cell. He would live out his days counting blankets and fighting frostbite, stripped of his command but not his rank. Silas Crow had survived as well, after a fashion. The flooding of the mine had bankrupted the local operation, and his investors in Boston had fired him. He had left town on the midnight stage, leaving behind a ruined reputation and a lawsuit from the environmental damage. He was not in jail, but his empire of silver was gone, buried under the mud of the river he had tried to steal. It is not justice, Eliza said, sitting by the stream where she was washing bandages. Not really. Nantan sat on a rock nearby, whittling a piece of cedar. His leg was healing, though he still walked with a limp that might never fully leave him. The white man's justice is a circle, Nantan said. It protects those inside, but Rourke is gone. Crow is gone. The river is here. That is the justice of the earth." Eliza looked at the water. It was clear again. The copper taste was gone. The trout were rising to feed in the eddies. "And us?" Eliza asked. She wore a dress made of buckskin now, given to her by Mara. Her gray traveling dress was packed away, a relic of a dead woman. Her hair was loose, braided with a strip of leather. "The town still hates you," Nantan said honestly. "They say you are a witch who seduced the water." "Let them talk," Eliza said. She wrung out the linen cloth. "I am done listening to them. Tomas says there is a doctor coming from Tucson." Nantan said, "To replace the one who left. He will need a nurse. A woman who knows how to stitch a wound and birth a baby." "I am not going back to the clinic," Eliza said. She looked up at him. "I am going to build my own here, near the reservation border, for anyone who needs it, miner, soldier, or Apache. If they want my help, they leave their guns at the door and their hate outside." Nantan stopped whittling. He looked at her with that intense, quiet gaze that still made her heart stumble. "It will be hard," he said. "I know." Eliza smiled. It was a smile that reached her eyes, crinkling the corners. It was a smile that had seen the worst of men and decided to believe in the water. "But I have a good partner, even if he does have a bad leg." Nantan stood up and walked to her. He did not limp as much when he was near her. He reached down and pulled her to her feet. "The leg is getting better," he said, "and the storm season is almost over." "Not for us," Eliza said, leaning her head against his shoulder. "For us, I think it is just beginning." Nantan laughed, a low rumble against her ear. "Then let it rain." They stood together by the riverbank, watching the water flow toward the horizon. They were exiles, outcasts, and survivors. They had lost their standing in the world of maps and contracts, but they had gained something that could not be written in a ledger. They had the river. They had the truth. And in the vast unforgiving silence of the West, they had each other. That was enough. 3 months had passed since the explosion that shattered the silence of Dry Creek Basin, and the valley had begun the slow, arduous work of healing. The scars on the land were still visible. The collapsed mouth of the Crow silver mine was a jagged wound in the earth, and the charred remains of the diversion dam still jutted from the water like broken teeth. But the water itself ran clear. The victory was not the kind found in the dime novels Eliza used to read in Philadelphia. There were no parades, and no one pinned a medal on Nantan's chest. The victory was quieter, measured in the steady rhythm of the current and the absence of the metallic taste that had once plagued the morning coffee. Captain Rourke had been transferred to a desolate outpost in the Dakota Territory, a place where the wind howled louder than his ambitions. It was a demotion in everything but rank, a quiet exile for a man who had become a liability to the Army's image. Silas Crow was battling a dozen lawsuits from investors in Boston who had lost their fortunes when the mine flooded. He was a man drowning in paper, stripped of the power to drown others in water. Eliza stood on the bank of the river, her tripod set firmly in the soft earth. She ducked under the black viewing cloth, focusing the lens on a wooden gauge Nantan had hammered into the riverbed. "Hold it steady," she called out. Nantan stood waist-deep in the water, his hand resting on the gauge. He wore a simple cotton shirt and buckskin breeches, the bandage gone from his shoulder, leaving only a puckered white scar. He looked at the lens not with suspicion, but with a patient amusement. "The water does not pose, Eliza," he said. "It does if you ask nicely," she replied, sliding the glass plate into the holder. She exposed the plate for 3 seconds. This was the 12th photograph she had taken this month. She was creating a baseline, a living record of the river's natural flow, season by season. These images, along with her detailed notes on water levels and sediment, were being sent to a lawyer in Tucson who specialized in land disputes. They were building a wall of evidence that no future mining company could breach without a fight. She capped the lens and emerged from the cloth, wiping sweat from her forehead. The late summer heat was heavy, but it felt clean. "Done," she said. Nantan waded out of the river. His limp was barely noticeable now, a subtle hitch in his stride that only someone who loved him would see. He picked up her heavy equipment case without asking, hoisting it onto his shoulder. "Old Tomas is coming," he said, nodding toward the dusty track that led to their homestead. "He brings the mail." Their homestead was a generous word for the structure they were building near the border of the reservation land. It was a cabin built of rough-hewn pine and river stone, sitting in a grove of cottonwoods. It was half-finished, smelling of sawdust and hope. The front room was already designated as a clinic, with a clean table and shelves for Eliza's jars. They walked back together, the silence between them comfortable. In the beginning, silence had been a wall. Now, it was a bridge. Thomas was waiting by the unfinished porch, his mule grazing on a patch of buffalo grass. He held up a thick envelope. "From the judge," Thomas said, his leathery face cracking into a grin. Eliza took the envelope. Her hands, rougher now than they had ever been, tore it open. She scanned the legal script. "The injunction is permanent," she said, letting out a breath she felt she'd been holding for weeks. "The territory has declared the upper basin a protected watershed. No new mining permits can be issued within 5 miles of the source." Nantan set the camera case down. He looked at the river, then at the mountains that held the bones of his ancestors. "Paper is fragile," he said, "but this paper is a shield." "It is a start," Eliza said. "It gives the valley room to breathe." Mara appeared from the side of the house. She had been helping Nantan lay the stone for the chimney. In the early days, Mara had watched Eliza with the eyes of a hawk watching a snake. She had tested her, pushing her to grind corn until her blisters broke, waiting for the white woman to pack her bags and run. Eliza had not run. She had bandaged the blisters and kept grinding. Now. Mara wiped her hands on her apron and walked over to Eliza. She did not smile. Mara did not give smiles away for free, but she reached into the bucket of water she had brought from the spring. She dipped a ladle and held it out to Eliza first. "Drink," Mara said. "The dust is thick today." It was a small gesture, simple and domestic, but in the language of the high country, it was an adoption. Eliza took the ladle. Their fingers brushed. "Thank you, Mara," Eliza said. Mara nodded, then turned to Nantan. "The chimney draws well, but you need more mud for the upper stones. Do not be lazy." Nantan chuckled. "Yes, grandmother." As Mara walked away, Nantan looked at Eliza. "She likes you. She told me I stack wood like a blind beaver," Eliza said, wiping her mouth. "That is high praise," Nantan assured her. "She usually says people stack wood like a drunk beaver." They spent the afternoon working on the cabin. The sounds of their life were simple, the rhythmic rasp of a saw, the dull thud of a hammer, the hiss of water boiling on the fire. It was hard work. Eliza's back ached, and her hands were stained with clay and chemical development. But as she looked around at the frame of the roof rising against the sky, she realized she had never felt more grounded. She had spent her life running from her family's expectations, running from the suffocation of the East, running from the fear of being owned. She had thought freedom meant constant motion. She had thought that if she stopped, she would be trapped. But here, driving a nail into a beam that Nantan held steady, she understood that freedom was not about having no ties. It was about choosing the ties that bound you. The sun began to dip below the canyon rim, painting the sky in violent shades of violet and orange. Nantan put down his hammer and wiped his face with his sleeve. "The light is good," he said. "For the river." It was an invitation. They walked down to the water, to the specific bend where the willows wept into the current. It was the place where they had met, the place where she had fallen, terrified and wet, into his world. The memory of that day was sharp. The fear of Hawk Danner, the shock of the cold water, the sight of Nantan standing there like a statue carved from bronze. It felt like a lifetime ago. They sat on the flat rock where Nantan had left his clothes that day. The river swirled past, indifferent to their presence, yet essential to it. "I received a letter from my sister," Eliza said softly. "She asked when I was coming home. She says Philadelphia is beautiful in the autumn." Nantan picked up a smooth stone and turned it over in his fingers. He did not look at her. He waited. He had learned that trust was not about demanding answers. It was about leaving space for the truth to be spoken. I wrote back, Eliza continued. I told her I am home. Nantan looked at her then. His dark eyes were warm, reflecting the last of the sunlight. It is not an easy home, he said. The winter will be cold. The town still whispers. And there will always be men like Crow, looking for something to steal. I know, Eliza said. I am not afraid of the cold. And let them whisper. We have the truth in glass and ink. She turned to him, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. You once told me I was a storm. You said I was the only storm you would welcome. Nantan nodded. I remember. I have always felt like one, Eliza confessed. Chaotic, destructive. I thought that if I stayed in one place too long, I would tear it apart. That is why I kept moving. I was afraid I would break everything I touched. She looked at the cabin visible through the trees, the sturdy lines of it, the smoke curling from the chimney they had built together. But I didn't break this, she whispered. Nantan reached out and took her hand. His grip was firm, the calluses on his palm rough against her skin. It was the hand of a warrior who had learned to be a builder. Storms bring the rain, Nantan said quietly. Without the storm, the grass dies, the river dries up. You did not break this valley. Eliza, you woke it up. He brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles. And I have changed too, he said. I thought being strong meant standing alone, like a rock. I thought trusting a white woman was a weakness that would kill me. And now, Eliza asked, now I know that a rock standing alone just gets worn down by the wind, Nantan said. Strength is in the grove of trees. They tangle their roots together so the wind cannot blow them over. He smiled, and the expression transformed his face, softening the harsh lines of his history. If you are the storm, Eliza Hart, then I have learned how to build a house in the wind, and I plan to live in it for a long time. Eliza felt a tear slip down her cheek, hot and fast. It was not a tear of sadness. It was the overflow of a heart that was finally full. Then we stay, she said. We built the clinic. We guard the river. We make sure the story is told right. We stay, Nantan agreed. He pulled her close, and she rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. It was a rhythm she knew as well as her own. Below them, the river rushed on, carrying the melted snow from the peaks down to the thirsty plains. It flowed over rocks and through canyons, unstoppable and free. It would outlast the mines. It would outlast the soldiers. It would outlast the names on the maps. But for this moment, in the twilight of the 19th century, the river belonged to them, and they, finally, belonged to each other. The sun vanished, and the first star appeared, hanging bright and solitary above the wire that no longer carried lies. The west was vast and wild, and the future was unwritten. But as Eliza looked at the man beside her, she knew they would write it together. It would be a hard life, a real life, and it would be enough. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to hear from you. Please comment below and tell me where you are listening from to share your thoughts and connect with others. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel Wild West Tales. Like the video and hit the hype button to help this story reach more listeners. Thank you for your support.